Alright guys, hope you're doing well. I thought I'd be good enough to be back by today, but last night proved otherwise. So hopefully I'll see you guys Tuesday, and we just have one more day of this weird hybrid solo class. So let's just get into it. We actually have two burning questions today. Our main burning question are, what are some of the different interpretations of the classic David and Goliath story? While the burning question for the end of the class, or maybe for some homework over the weekend, is what are the 4 covenants with God as described in the Hebrew Bible? In the Hebrew Bible, God makes agreements with 4 different people, representing 4 different covenants between God and man. And you'll understand those a little bit better through an assignment today. And so we were going to have a verbal Kickstarter. I'm just going to have you kind of independently reflect while I tell you some things. Then we're going to explore some traditional interpretations. We'll have you read the 17th chapter of the first book of Samuel. Then you'll watch a little excerpt from the History Channel's adaptation of that story. You'll discuss any inconsistencies, contradictions, similarities. And then we'll explore Malcolm Gladwell's version. Some of you may be familiar with Malcolm Gladwell, a pretty famous philosopher, I guess would be a great way to describe him. Book Outliers. He actually has a phenomenal podcast with music producer Rick Rubin. And then after you've seen the traditional interpretations, you've seen Malcolm Gladwell's version, then I'm going to ask you to write an answer to a prompt. And then you can start and work on your covenant homework. Your only homework would be to finish this prompt and to finish the short covenant homework. And then when I get back on Tuesday, we'll jump into the Torah and a little bit of Judaism as religion and ethnicity. And then also I will answer some of the questions that you guys brought up last class. And speaking of last class, just a quick review, right? God, Yahweh, Israel, both the people and the land, and the Torah being 3 foundational aspects of Judaism. And let me go to last class's Kickstarter, which was the Padlet. You guys did a pretty good job on that. I just want to clean up a few things. And so you can look through this, and most of this is accurate. The only things that I would like to clean up is the significance of Yom Kippur. A lot of you guys must have done a quick Google search to see that it is the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, or just something you remembered from world history or something. Or one person remembered and everyone kind of copied off of it. A few things I'd like to clear up. It's not the Jewish New Year. The Jewish New Year is actually Rosh Hashanah, which comes a little bit before. But this part is key. It's their Day of Atonement, where they ask for forgiveness and kind of purify their body, mind, and spirit to lead them through a new year. And then a bris, not to get too graphic, but right here, this is right. It's the ceremonial circumcision for Jewish boys. I ain't getting too graphic on this video, so feel free to Google circumcision if you don't know what that is. But as we get into early Christianity, you're going to see that becomes a sticking point and part of the factors that ironically cause a division between the religion of Judaism and the religion of Christianity. So for your Kickstarter, I want you to take a second and brainstorm what comes to mind when you hear the phrase David and Goliath. Feel free to even pause this video for a second if you need to take some time. Many of you probably know the basics of the story, but when you hear the phrase David and Goliath, specifically when it's used outside of religion and someone references it, like what comes to mind? A lot of you are probably thinking Underdog, and that makes sense, especially in American culture. We seem to be obsessed with the underdog concept, right? Books, Little Engine That Could, countless movies, countless times in sports where you hear this David and Goliath metaphor, the little man going up against the giant corporation, anything like that. And David and Goliath is often told as kind of the prototypical story of the underdog overcoming the odds. And the underdog story is so built and ingrained into America's fabric that just recently I saw a commercial that kind of made me sick a little bit, but really drove this point home. And we'll watch it right now.
When does an underdog stop being an underdog? After the first big win? The second? Try never. Because being an underdog isn't about how much you win. It's about how hard you're willing to work for it. And making sure your opponents never know your next move. Which is why some of us make a point of staying underdogs, even when we're on top. Ram Trucks, J.D. Power's #1 brand in new vehicle quality.
So in that commercial, they're trying to build the sense that you are still an underdog, even if you are a rich, successful businessman or woman, even if you're about to buy a truck that typically starts at around $35,000, which is above the poverty line for a single adult. Even if you have that kind of money to throw around, you are still the underdog. In my humble opinion, a little bit of mental gymnastics done there, because people like to see themselves as the underdog. They like to root for the underdog. But after we learned some of the traditional versions of the story, by using the Hebrew Bible, Malcolm Gladwell makes an argument that David vs. Goliath isn't necessarily a story about an underdog rising up. But before we get into that, let me give you some background information. So at least with the people who are in this class in the fall semester, I think you should remember this, that when Jesus of Nazareth was crucified, INRI was inscribed above him. And a simplified explanation is, in Latin, J's are I's. So it's really kind of JNRJ. So really what it's saying is Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum, which is Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And this is the Roman Empire telling passerbys, anyone who walks by this crucifixion, that Jesus the Nazarene claimed he was the King of the Jews, which, as we'll talk about more in a month, is a big usurpation of the Roman political power. Remember, think back to Romans as occupiers of Judea. And so what does it mean to be the King of the Jews? Well, according to the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, Saul was the first unified king of the Jews, and then David was king, and then Solomon. But we're going to focus on David a little bit. And before David was king, he appears in the first book of Samuel. You can see in the chart on the right that the first book of Samuel is while Saul was king. And we're not going to focus today on David as king. You'll get a little bit of that in your homework. But mostly we're going to get David under Saul's leadership. And so some of you were asking about kind of the religious landscape that Judaism came out of. And part of what made Judaism so revolutionary is that around it at the time, all of the other religions, or most of the other religions that we know of, were polytheistic. And many of them had different tribes, and each tribe had a particular god that was sovereign over their area, controlled where they lived and fought. And so when nations went into battle fighting each other, the gods of each nation would also fight. And whoever side won, that god must have been the stronger god. And not only that, but these guys were playing for keeps. So, in a lot of times, the defeated god was added to the pantheon, the collection of gods of the victorious nation. And you'd often do this by bringing an idol of the defeated god into the temple of the victorious god. And so we're going to join this story in the middle of a battle between the Philistines and the Israelites. Super oversimplified version, the Philistines are kind of the Israelites' arch rivals. You could look at them as the Prospect, the Elk Grove. And while the Israelites don't necessarily have an idol of their god, right? That's against one of the commandments. What they do have is the Ark of the Covenant, which we'll go into a little bit more next week. But that could be the idol taken by the Philistines if they beat the Israelites. While the Philistines, their god that they pray to is Dagon. And so in the story of Samson, you can see the Philistines giving a sacrifice to Dagon. He's kind of this half man, half fish, kind of a merman, if you will. And so in this story, not only is it the Philistines versus the Israelites, but it's Yahweh versus Dagon. So what you're going to do is you're going to go into today's folder in Schoology, and then you're going to read the 17th chapter of the first book of Samuel. And that's how you would say it, right? It says 1 Samuel 17. That's the 17th chapter of the first book of Samuel. There's 2 of them in the Hebrew Bible. And then after you read that chapter, you're going to watch the History Channel's adaptation of the event. And actually, please start that at 127. You can start it before, but I don't want you to compare the first 90 seconds with the stuff you read, because they're coming from different parts of the Bible. And so while you watch it, I want you to take notes on any of the similarities, but really any of the inconsistencies and differences that you see in the two. And so feel free to hit pause, rewind, watch it a couple times to try to notice a bunch of the different similarities. When you're finished, talk to a classmate about what you saw, and then watch the second Radcliffe video in today's folder. And I'll see you soon.